So as I said before, we are thinking about World Food Day today. And to be really honest with you, I have never experienced hunger. I have never been malnourished. And I don't believe I've ever worried about where my next meal will come from. I did, however, grow up in the 80s where there was a huge focus on the 1983 to 1985 Ethiopian Civil War, the drought that led to over 1 million people dying of starvation. I'm not sure if I'll ever forget the nightly news updates of the large-bellied, red-headed, malnourished children with their ribs sticking out that flashed across the TV screen on a nightly basis. These images are embedded in my brain, and when someone says the word starvation, my mind goes back to the many 24-hour famine fundraisers my school and my church held to raise awareness for and money for Ethiopia. I remember the organizers not really wanting us to starve, but not wanting us to feast as well, so they fed us fresh juices and rice. I remember thinking at the time, those poor children, so deprived, when really none of us had any clue of what that was like. So when the email came out about World Food Day, and it popped up on my screen, I must admit I was a tad curious. I like food. Just a second here. Sorry. I'm not sick, I just have a little asthma, so I'm so sorry. So it turns out that World Food Day was launched in 1945. It was created to celebrate the launch of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Awareness Organization. And World Food Day celebrates the maintenance of food security all over the world, especially in times of crisis. The launch of the Food and Agricultural Organization by the UN has played a huge role in taking this worthy goal forward. It's an annual celebration. It serves as a marker of importance of the organization and helps to raise awareness of crucial needs for the successful agricultural policies to be implemented by the governments across the world to ensure there's ample food available for everybody. In the recent years, World Food Day it uses annual day to celebrate or to focus on different aspects of food security and agriculture, including fishing communities, climate change, and biodiversity. So as I read this huge sentence about this World Food Day celebration, I had to ask myself, should I care about this day? Why should I care about this day? Why is it important for us to celebrate food security, acknowledge food security? And why is this social justice issue important? Is it something I should bring forth to my congregation, or should I just ignore it? And I decided to bring it forth to you today. So in 2005, as an amateur anthropologist at the time, I became obsessed with this book called Hungry Planet by a photographer called Pete Menzel. It fascinated me to see what people ate in 1 week around the world. It intrigued me and concerned me of how much they spent. So I did have a video to show you, but I don't think it's working. Is that correct? Yeah, it's not working. So I'm sorry, I don't have pictures or anything with this book. But things go this way sometimes, and that's okay. I know that Beth and Jim tried really hard to get it to work, and sometimes technology just does not work. So I'll describe the book. So the book has many pages, beautiful pages of people sitting in front of a counter or a table of all the food they bought that week. So the countries include the US, Canada, African countries, Middle Eastern countries, Australia. Basically the whole world is kind of covered in this book. And some people have just a bag of rice and some lentils on the table. Some people have 16, 18 bottles of wine and 15 loaves of bread. And some people have all meat and a little vegetables. And some people have more vegetables, and people have no vegetables. So I think you can kind of get your picture in your head, and I would encourage you maybe after the service to look the book up, because it's really cool. And there's lots of videos and images of this book on the internet. And again, it's called Hungry Planet by Peter Menzel, and I can send it out as well. So what interests me most in the book was the amount of money people spend on food each week. So this varies from maybe $400 to $40. And you think, who could eat for $40? But if you're only eating lentils and rice, I guess $40 is enough. But what interesting more is that in the United States, and I'll talk about Canada later, but only 6.4% of their income is spent on food, compared to Nigeria, which 56.4% of their income is spent on food. So in most countries, the amount of food spent by people is proportionate to their overall income. And this has declined in recent decades, allowing the population to spend more on essentials and other comforts of life, so they don't have to choose between shelter and food. They have enough for both. But the problem in many lower income countries is that this proportion has gone up, and the income taken by these food purchases still exceeds 50%. We're squeezing the poor people, their spending power, and leaving them vulnerable to price spikes and them having to decide between food or shelter. What is more important to their well-being at the time? Should I pay my rent, or should I starve, or should I eat, or should I be homeless? In Canada, we spend just over 11% of our income on food. So if I think of my family in general, how much we spend about a year in food, and I think it's probably $14,000, which makes me want to vomit, because that's a lot of money on groceries. But I can't actually comprehend if I had to spend $50,000 a year on food. Can you? Can you actually think of spending $50,000 a year on food? What would that do to our lives? I'm sure we could still probably afford our house and food, but I don't think we'd be affording much clothing. I don't think we'd be going on vacations, and I don't think we'd be eating out for sure. So part of the reason that the rich nations spend less on food is because our government supplements the food industries. We pay higher taxes. We all know that our agriculture system is supplemented incredibly by the government, and in the States even more. We buy a lot of our produce and food from third world and developing countries at a significant less cost than we can produce these goods for. Yet we're paying very little to the farmers in these third world countries. I remember visiting a banana farm in St. Vincent and that's a little small island in the Caribbean. And the farmer told me that he made $45,000 a year on his banana crop, but it cost him $30,000 a year to produce the bananas. So he made about $15,000 a year. And remember, this is a country that probably spends 24% of their income on food. And this is not a very viable wage. Yeah, we just pay, I don't know, I bought bananas the other day, $1.50 a pound for the bananas, and the farmer gets about 5 cents of this money per pound. So I'm pretty sure we're all aware of the food insecurities in the third world, developing countries, but would you be shocked to learn that 14.6% of Canadians suffer from food insecurities? They may not be starving, but they are wondering where their next meal is coming from. So this reason why I brought this issue of World Food Day to you today is because this is not a problem that we see on the news. This isn't a problem that Africa or Asia. This is a problem here in Canada, right, with our neighbors. So I'll ask you again, why should we care about this social justice issue? Does it affect you, your neighbor, your children? So I gave you some information to digest. But what I really want to do is I want to look a little more closely at the Isaiah passage. I picked this passage for a reason. It's not an lectionary. It wasn't assigned to us for today. I picked it because of what it said about feeding the poor. And it asks us, what part are we called to play in this world of food insecurities? This passage is a prophetic call for justice. And Isaiah invites us to view the world with new eyes. This is an invitation to see that God's heart is for those in need. In this passage, we heard that people are fasting, but they're not fasting for the right reasons. They're not fasting as a contemplative way to see the world differently. They're fasting because they want to be in God's favor. And then we learn that God's heart is not turned towards those who have perfected the practice of praying or fasting. God's heart yearns for those who have not yet been welcomed into the fold. Those people who are not at church. Those who've been left in the margins because they are the have-nots. They're the ones who lack resources, food, and shelter. They have no power with which to assure their own justice. They have nothing to offer. It's to them our God extends grace. And Isaiah insists that they are the ones to whom faithful practices must be directed to. So Isaiah provides an opportunity for us to look at the injustices of the world, the vulnerable and the hungry. And I really do believe that Isaiah gives us one of the most compelling reasons to care about the hungry, about the marginalized, about the oppressed. When he states, we lose the bonds of inequity and share our bread. When we share our bread with the hungry, the light breaks forth like the dawn. I like the sound of that. The light breaks forth like the dawn, and we experience great joy when we give. I think we all know that. Justice making for those who exist in the margins is how our light shines. Our light illuminates the grace and the wisdom of God who loves and cares for the least among us. Often the metaphor of light is thought of as a city on a hill, or perhaps as a beacon for the nations. Light, so understood, conveys the delivery of a message about God's grace to the world who still is in darkness. And this could be an apt metaphor for Isaiah's use of light. However, the context may suggest a light metaphor functioning more like a lighthouse cutting through the fog of God's silence. So you can picture that, the lighthouse through the fog. Isaiah links the wisdom of God to justice practiced by the people. And Isaiah will not allow us to settle into reserved, individualistic thinking of faith that rests in the comfort of one's own salvation. No. Such prayer and fasting is far too removed from the afflicted. Isaiah reveals to us that the oppressed are precisely where we want to find the presence of God. Any desire for personal or national restoration must be sought through seeking justice and caring for the afflicted in our midst and beyond these walls. So what is this passage calling us to do? Does it mean we should establish a food pantry outside of our church? Should we build a homeless shelter? Should we open our wallets and send money to social charities? Should we sponsor free dinners like we asked to do at Thanksgiving and Christmas? What does God require of us? I think what Isaiah is really saying is that social justice issues are a given. They deserve more priority than ritualistic fasting. It doesn't take much effort to cut back or reduce our consumption for a short period of time. And I believe that God was really unhappy with the Israelites because of their unwillingness to share. And that's the point I'm trying to get, is they would not share. The stone soup, people were not willing to share. I think a real exercise in faith is to be able to give something away. Consuming less doesn't have a cost to it. In fact, it's savings. If I decide I'm only going to eat bread for a week, it's probably going to save me $300 that week or $250. When we eat less, our food budget goes down. That benefits us. However, giving, on the other hand, requires sharing. And this may mean sharing our resources. For example, with the banana farmer, by ensuring that we're buying fair trade bananas. I don't even know where to buy those at, honestly. But we know where to buy fair trade coffee, we know where to buy fair trade chocolates, and even our clothing can be sustainable. Yes, I know these products cost way more than we want to pay, but it's about sharing our wealth. It may mean shopping at the local farmer's market instead of buying food produced in the US. Shopping local. Yes, again, it costs more, but it's about sharing our wealth if we can. And I do realize we can't all do this. You can also give to the church. Did you know when you give to Parkdale United Church, a portion of your offering every Sunday is automatically donated to the church's mission and service funds? As one of Canada's oldest charities, the M&S Fund supports missions across Canada and overseas, and it has adopted, in 2013, adopted a commitment to food sovereignty as a framework to help foster more just food systems in Canada and around the world. So giving to the church helps us. I think what Isaiah calls us to do and what Jesus calls us to do is share. And I don't think Isaiah and Jesus are just talking about sharing resources. I think that they're talking about sharing ourselves as well. Serving, sharing, and giving. If we look back to the beginning of the service, those 3 words I used to describe our ministry, I'll remind you that Parkdale United Church described itself as a place that acts for justice. We stand up for the marginalized, oppressed, for those who are suffering, and we do this by reaching beyond the walls of Parkdale for those who need a little more love and attention. So I hope you see that the World Food Day is not just for people living in third world country or developing countries, it's for us now. It's a call to action. It's a call to share, to love our neighbors as ourselves. Amen.